Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Bucciarrelli with the Lawrence County Regional Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to Chamber Chat. Our guest today is attorney Raeann Burgo from the Pittsburgh law firm of Fisher Phillips. Raeann, welcome to Chamber Chat.
Hi, Paul. It's nice to be back again.
Thank you. So a few weeks ago, you shared with our audience some best practices for hiring and legal considerations. So today we're going to talk about the importance of employee handbooks and some best practices around employee handbooks. So maybe to start, I can tell you as an employee, I've always appreciated having a handbook when I went to a new company, but not all companies provided them. Can you share your definition, for example, of what you consider an employee handbook to be?
Absolutely. And I think your point that you appreciated the handbook as an employee really starts off the discussion because it is a key communication tool between the employee and the employer. It's probably one of the first documents that the employee sees, other than filling out maybe some orientation and onboarding. Like, this is really one of your first impressions that you're giving to your employee about your company.
So I guess that's a good reason. So why should a company provide an employee handbook?
Well, so, an employee handbook is a compilation of the company's policies and procedures, and it sets the tone for the company's mission and their values and what the culture is in the company and the purpose. And it shows employees that, they're a very important integral part of the company. And it helps employees and management understand what is expected of everyone in the work environment.
Yeah,
So
I would think it makes a great first impression, and it reinforces the idea that as an employee, you're an asset of our company.
Absolutely. And it because it sets forth clear policies and procedures, everybody knows how they should act in what's expected of them behavior-wise, conduct-wise, what their benefits are, what they're entitled to. And it helps management to stay consistent with those practices, with those procedures and policies, because everybody knows this is how we're going to work.
Right. So I know from an employee perspective, it's valuable, but I also suspect from an employer perspective, it does raise a number of legal considerations when creating or updating the handbook. Can you share some of those legal considerations?
In Pennsylvania, employment is at will, which means that, an employee and an employer can separate the employment relationship for any reason, as long as it's not an illegal one. So an illegal one would be discrimination or for illegal purposes. So the handbook is important to let everybody know that employment is at will and that it is not a contract and that they're not engaging in a contract. That's one of the legal things that you have to consider when you're creating or updating an employee handbook. You don't want to have language in there that supposes or assumes that there is a contract. In fact, you want to have quite the opposite, something that clearly defines that it is not an employment contract.
So just to clarify, maybe define what employee at will means.
Right. So an employee at will, employment at will, which is Pennsylvania is an employment at will state, which means that an employer and employee can terminate the employment relationship for any reason that's not an illegal reason. Okay. So what's an illegal reason? Wrongful termination because of retaliation for an employee, let's say bringing forth a concern about a workplace safety issue, or treating people differently because of race or gender or disability. That's important because not only does the employee handbook clearly state that you're an employee at will, but the employee handbook should also define all of those policies that talk about things like workplace safety, non-retaliation, what the employee's equal employment opportunity policy is, because that goes to the non-discrimination and non-harassment.
So are there any precautions that an employer should take when creating or updating a handbook?
Yes. Big precautions is that they want to make sure that they are up to date so that they are fully in compliance with the law. So you want to make sure you're current with what your obligations are. That's one of the things. The other thing you want to think about is what you want to not include, in a sense. So, for example, you don't want to include your internal practices, so to speak. So in other words, you have your internal review process. Now, you might be able to put in the handbook that a review process will occur, but you probably don't want to put out step by step what exactly that process would be.
I understand. So how do human resource departments then benefit from an employee handbook?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, it it sets out what the policies are of the company. And for example, Your employee handbook should state what your PTO policy is,
Okay.
what your sick time policy is, what your benefits are. So what an employer or employee receives as being an employee of the company. And so this helps human resources because there's this source that employees can go to
Okay.
see what exactly they're entitled to. It also helps because management, as I mentioned before, has this book to look at to see, what are the disciplinary steps to make sure that all managers and supervisors are following the same process.
And I would think that ensures that all employees are going to be treated the same way and equally, no matter what the circumstance.
Absolutely. It creates consistency.
So should the employee handbook be a part of the orientation process when a new employee comes to a company?
Definitely. It should be one of the first things that an employee receives. And it should include and as you go through the employment, there should be periodic updates, and you should include addendums to any handbook. So I recommend that an employee handbook be reviewed probably once a year. So you should look at, what state are you in? What new laws apply? Recently, one of the topics that comes up a lot is sick leave. There's been a lot of sick leave at local levels, not even just state, but municipalities. So you want to keep up with that and update your handbook accordingly. So not only do you want to review it when somebody joins the company, but you also want to send out those updates and have your employees review that. And one of the ways to ensure that employees are reviewing it when they're onboarding and as periodic updates come up is to include an employee acknowledgement. That's a very key part of an employee handbook. You want to make sure that employees signing off that they've reviewed it, they've received it, they've had the opportunity to ask questions about it, so that you don't have an employee coming back and saying, well, I didn't know that this policy existed, or I didn't know this was the procedure I needed to follow.
Did the pandemic at all impact the content of employee handbooks? Or is it too new for that to have happened yet?
No, it has. It definitely has. I mean, we're 2 years out from the beginning of the pandemic now, and, handbooks have definitely evolved as a result of the pandemic. One of the big policies that has evolved and has become more robust are telework and remote work policies in an employee handbook. So, if anybody has those or has not had one in their handbook, but now has remote employees, it's important that that's one of the main things you should be updating your handbook for right now.
Got it. Okay. So are there any topics that are taboo for employee handbooks?
There are a few that I advise clients to stay away from.
Okay.
One of them is not to use the word just cause. So just cause assumes that you have to have a reason, right? You have to have a reason to terminate somebody. And as we talked about earlier, Pennsylvania is an at-will employment state. So you don't have to have a reason. Usually, there is something, whether it's performance or, not meeting standards, or maybe there's misconduct, but generally you want to leave the word just cause out. And I always try to steer clients away from using the word probationary, which I think a lot of employers want to do. So they want to say, we're going to put you through a probationary period, or you're on probation for 90 days. And I don't know, Paul, what you think as an employee, but when I hear the word probationary as my status as an employee, I think, okay, well, that means when that's over, my status is going to change in some way as an employee. And it doesn't. So you don't want to create the impression that you're probationary. I can let you go during this period, but now you're not probationary. I can't let you go. And sometimes employees get confused.
So my interpretation sometime as an employee would have been, if you make it through the first 90 days, then you're golden. But it sounds like that isn't necessarily the case.
No, and that's exactly why you don't want to use that. I would use the word orientation. That's the word I would probably use or suggest using.
So does the employee handbook also discuss disciplinary steps? Because again, from my own background, I sort of remember a sequence of events that would be a verbal warning, a written warning, and then some probationary period where you'd have to correct the deficiencies. Should that be spelled out in a handbook, or is that too much detail?
No, I think that it probably depends on the company. I think it absolutely can. I think it's a good idea. What we're referring to as progressive discipline. So employees understand, if I engage in this type of conduct, I'm going to get a verbal warning. And then if I do it again, I'm going to get a written warning. And sometimes it's broken up by type of conduct, right? So there's more serious conduct that would call for immediate termination. And so you can break up your discipline steps that way. So A lot of employers do. It's not absolutely necessary, but probably from an employee standpoint, it makes sense because it lets them know what's coming.
I got it. Okay. So Raeann, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience here? You've provided a lot of great information. Anything that you want to leave us with?
I'm just going to mention that a lot of times I think employers and companies think that the employee handbook has to be this 50-page robust
Right.
book, which I think can get lost. And I think that, making sure you're concise in your policies and that you're including all the important ones and getting that acknowledgement, those are the most important things.
Well, Raeann, thank you so much again for this presentation today. Very informative. I think our audience will really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And to the audience, we'll see you again at the next Chamber Chat. Have a good day. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.